We're joined by independent journalist Rick Rowley, who's just back from Afghanistan. His piece on the U.S. warlord strategy in that country is airing on Al Jazeera English next week. Thanks for bringing in that clip, Rick. Disturbing stuff. Just to remind people, when Dostum says the U.S., I ask you to remember who your friends and allies are. Who is this guy?
Well, Dostum is the most famous warlord in Afghanistan. He's fought on all sides of the conflict. He's been a political survivor, an opportunist. He fought on the Russian side against the Mujahideen. Then he fought on the side of Massoud and his faction, the Mujahideen, during the civil war again when the Mujahideen split. Then he switched sides and fought with Hekmatyar, who was fighting against Massoud, and now during the U.S. invasion, he sided with the U.S. He was reportedly given a suitcase by the CIA with $10 million in it in order to be one of the three main generals leading the invasion from the north. He was a CIA asset for a while on the payroll.
Now, Hekmatyar is the one who's famous for throwing acid in the face of women. Dostum is famous for some other human rights crimes.
Yeah, the list of crimes that he is accused of is massive. I mean, none of them have been proven because it's the legal system and the possibility of doing investigations in Afghanistan is, very limited. I mean, part of our piece is about the Dashti Layli massacre, which is the piece that the allegation that has received the most press attention recently, and that is there were during the invasion in 2001, they loaded maybe 3,000 prisoners of war into a train. Into box cars, containers, like shipping containers that are on the back of semis, loaded them onto a train in the middle of the sun in the desert for 2 to 3 days. They without water, without air, and fired into these containers. As many as 2,000 people died, and their bodies were dumped in the desert and buried in the middle of the Dashti Layli desert. In every attempt to investigate that, had been blocked by the Bush administration and had been undermined by Dostum himself. I mean, all of the witnesses who had come forward in press accounts died or were disappeared or were arrested and tortured, and only now is there the beginnings of the possibility of an investigation.
Now, an investigation like that would coincide exactly with the strong desire in the United States to have the election of August signed, sealed, settled. Election strategy is seen as the sort of attractive alternative to military strategy.
Yeah, but I mean, if this election showed anything, it was it was the end of the hope of a central government, let alone a democratic government, but even a central kind of state in Afghanistan. The complete devolution of the country into regional commanders. I mean, in 2004, when Karzai was first elected, there was a real hope in Afghanistan. This was the end of warlord rule. This was the beginning of a national democratic kind of state. And now Karzai has been forced to bring all of these warlords back into his administration. It's not just Dostum. Fahim, General Fahim, who was the head of the Northern Alliance after Massoud was killed, it was his vice presidential candidate. Mohakik, the biggest Hazara warlord, was also a key member, a part of his campaign. And Dostum came in to deliver the North. So it's not only that we're losing the war militarily, it's that the state that we are trying to, that we're fighting and killing and dying to protect is a warlord state and a narco state, and an incredibly corrupt, violent, and incredibly unpopular state.
Now, what about Abdullah, who was the strongest opposition to Karzai? He says, I won.
Yeah, well, it's really impossible to tell. The scale of the fraud there is just so astronomical that it's really, really difficult. I mean, Abdullah also, many people call a warlord, and he was allied with Atta, Mohammed Atta, who's Dostum's main warlord ally in the north. This is something else, another, thing that we bring out in the piece, that in the Jazeera piece, that there is also the potential for these guys to fight. Mohammed Atta, a warlord ally of Abdullah, and Dostum, the warlord ally of Karzai, fought nearly a civil war.
So I'm hearing about the potential for a lot of fighting. You haven't even mentioned the Taliban yet. The Taliban's the only people we hear about in the United States. U.S. forces have asked for 40,000 more troops to subdue the Taliban. It sounds like the Taliban are the least of our troubles.
Well, I mean, the Taliban in the north and the south are basically living two different kinds of wars right now. In the south, it looks like an occupation and insurgency. In the north, it's the tail end of an unresolved civil war, with the U.S. backing some of the sides against other sides. But yeah, in the north, the security threat that people are worried about in the north is Dostum and Atta fighting each other over control of Balkh province.
So is 40,000 troops even, I mean, what role does this discussion about troops that was happening in the basement of the White House this week and has stories appearing in the press that Obama's going to have to go to Republicans even to get that because there isn't enough support in the country. Where is that discussion in this?
Well, I mean, first of all, every military analyst, serious military analyst I've talked to, has said that 40,000 troops isn't anywhere near enough. That I talked to a Colonel Bowen, who's doing an analysis of this for the Army, and he said that internally they're talking about 600,000 troops are what are necessary to pacify Afghanistan, and we don't have that kind of army. But in the north, I mean, the fact that even if you had that kind of army, you need a central state that people can believe in, in some alternative to the Taliban, and the warlords ruling in the north are not that alternative. There
was news this week that Peter Galbraith, a senior UN official in Afghanistan, had been dismissed under allegations of having collaborated with, fraudulent election counts. Is that important?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how important it is. I mean, there's been accusations flying in all sorts of different directions, and I mean, in these kinds of these kinds of dismissals are sometimes a way of of Karzai or other people flexing their muscle and showing that some degree of independence there. I mean,
because Karzai is accusing, to be clear, Karzai is accusing Galbraith of accusing him of fraud.
Yeah,
and that's what's been the complaint. We can't have a guy here who is making these kinds of allegations.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's Karzai flexing muscle and appearing to be I mean he's now in a complex position of being of owing his position to the United States and trying to mark himself as somewhat of a nationalist by distancing himself from the United States at a moment when he's incredibly unpopular in the country.
So let's talk about the Afghan people for a minute. I know that you always go where other reporters don't and actually talk to regular folks. Are they feeling safe and warm, like the baby embraced in the chest of Dostum?
We travel around Shebregan, which is the stronghold, the center of Dostum's stronghold, and there you cannot find a person who has a bad word to say about the general. I mean, they're sort of terrifying in a way. But so we traveled looking for Dostum's critics, and we found them in refugee camps, 600 kilometers away outside of the city of Herat. There are 17,000 families, 75,000 people who have fled his rule in the north, who claim that his men, loot their villages, steal their livestock. They're an Uzbek militia who is, they claim, attacks other ethnicities, attacks the Pashtun and the Tajiks up there. There's an Atta, who's the governor just one province away, says that, Dostum is worse than the Taliban. And if he comes back into power, the people will not accept it and will fight against it. I mean, in 2002, after the U.S. invasion, there were shootouts between Atta and Dostum's men. They both deployed tanks to Mazar-e-Sharif to fight over that spot. So I mean, this is not. This is more than just saber rattling. It is the actual potential for a real deep political military schism.
And that's what you look at in the next bit of video that we're going to go out with. Very short clip from a longer story that'll appear on Al Jazeera English, where you talk about the rise in, people attempting to arm themselves for self-defense or for more. Explain it a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are, with the rumors that Dostum and Atta are, have knives drawn against each other, people are arming themselves again in the north, and there's a huge spike in arms sales on the black market. And we were traveling around both with Dostum's armed men and Atta's armed men. And Atta's armed men were searching cars and found people with unregistered rifles. And I mean,
are the U.S. military businesses getting a piece of those contracts? It could be the one revived part of our economy.
Yeah.
Rick Rowley, thanks so much for coming in.